Bonjour. Nous sommes entrés dans l'Anthropocène.
Good morning. We've entered the era of Anthropocene. We are the Anthropocene. We are the human community. We live the acidification of the oceans, the soil pollution, the famines, the pandemic, the fire spreads, the migrations, the floods, the droughts, the generalized urbanization, the social inequalities. And the list is infinite. We no longer control the effects we have on the planet. Everything around us is shifting. And whether we like it or not, we're newly exploring our own lives and environments. From our own environments, our daily lives, what do we want to express? What is offending our moral conscience and our sense of justice? What makes us angry or happy? What are our ideas and intentions to change the situation? Do we feel like earthlings? So let us speak, give our word, and engage in dialogues. Good morning, or good morning again, everyone. I'm very pleased to moderate this third session of this Anthropocene Manifesto. So some of you might have heard me and listen to me in the previous session and will still hear me in the next session. So for this session number 3, as for any session, we've formed groups of countries and territories so that everyone can speak from the same time slot. So now, for session number 3, we will have the Reunion Island, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, and maybe other countries. So please be our guests. Maybe other countries, France, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Mauritius, and the United Arab Emirates. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. So please be our special guests for this session. And we hope that you'll be with us for this session number 3. So why do we want to take the floor and express ourselves today? To share our testimony about the era of Anthropocene, and in order to resonate together and connect, because we all live on the same planet. So how can this manifesto be meaningful? For me, today, this is going to give life to probably a new network. And we do hope that this session will be as fruitful as the previous 2. So just to explain you how this session is going to unfold, for those of you who weren't with us, on this set, we have Jérémy, who's the coordinator, and Lou, who will draw throughout the session and try to transcribe our feelings in another way. And I'd also like to thank our interpreters, because all of this session will be interpreted into English and French, and I'll try to speak as slowly as possible. And please do log in the channels, the interpreting channels. And we also have a chat room through which you'll be able to talk to Jeremy. And even if you don't wish to take the floor, if you can share your testimonies from wherever you are, this will be very enriching for us, so that we can have as many worldviews as possible. So we'll split the session in three moments. So we'll start with the videos, then we'll have the reactions from the video makers, and then a debate session. On the Reunion Island, former colony from the French Empire, everything was built on this predation and violent relationship for human beings and ecosystems. My wish is that the urban planning of my island stops this paradigm. The notion of resources, whether they be natural or cultural, are no longer assimilated or related to stock for human activities. We need to understand that in Reunion Island, 1 million people are concentrated on only 20% of the territory, and there are climate hazards, and they can be more or less intense because of the tropical climate. So there are heavy rains, mudslides, landslides, because below our feet lies a living volcano. So, of course, you've probably heard that glyphosate is going to keep being used here, but this is one of the main threats that we face, and it's urgent right now for our societies to react and understand that we are part of ecosystems and of the ecosystem that they threaten and that they submit to their violence. We are only one part of the living beings on this biosphere, and our development choices have consequences on their lives and also on our own lives, because the ecosystems in which we live produce the necessary ramparts to the threats that I've previously mentioned. So at the end of the day, I would like to ask you these two questions. What is the role of these non-human living beings on Earth so that they can have noble existence and a decent existence? And when will we understand that we human beings cannot go anywhere?
We defend what we have learned to love, so touched by the spirit and integrated by the senses that Corinne Morel-Darleux reminded us. So we have to talk about places of my childhood, an invitation to walk along the banks with Simone Weil, Augustin Berg, a walk through a 900 village which crossed the lives of medieval lords, Cathar Templar knights, carpenters, wine growers and builders. Today we walk through the ruins of this history, a successful blending of culture, heritage and the living world, a space to be explored and appropriated. And as Augustin Berg recalls, no long-term life is possible in a place that is not appropriated. We have to talk about these places that we wander. And the answer to the Anthropocene is therefore topophilia, the love of a place. We have to talk about those deep feelings that come from the knowledge of a specific place, these ritual annuals, the wildlife, a specific place where the soul shows signs of affection and recognition. It's a sort of bioregionalism that is essential for the survival of humanity on Earth. It means ecological understanding, regional and community conscience, the ability to develop wisdom and spirituality, decentralized social organization, supportive help and humility of human groups. The love of the places we live in testifies to the ranging need to land. A need for rooting is dear to Simone Weil. The rooting is perhaps the most important and least well-known need of human being. It's difficult to define. Human is rooted by their real, active and natural participation in the existence of a collective that preserves the treasures of the past and some presentiments of the future. Each human needs to reserve the whole moral, intellectual and spiritual life through places to which they naturally belong. So what do? Drown gently. We need to organize pessimism. It's not, as Corinne Morel-Darleux suggests, humans do not need to form a continent but create islands of residence. We need to have a common goal. We need to mingle artistic creation, social critique, the importance of living the biosphere, rather than talking about environment and nature. But in the cultural battle, the issue is not to inform, but to strike at our sensitivity, target our insides, everything that must be endured by the senses. Because without a body, without a look, without touching, without smell, loses its humanity, its ability to feel and transmit that has been fled, as Corinne Morel-Darleux says. Here is therefore the portrait of a political soul for our earthly home.
Hello everyone, my name is Poudel. I'm from Kathmandu, Nepal, and currently I'm working as a research associate in a research-based NGO called Nepal Water Conservation Foundation for Academic Research, acronym NWCF. So it's a research think tank. It's been around for more than 30 years now, and it's mostly working in the areas of water issues, water governance, water pollution, almost everything related to water. So I was invited by my good friend Jeremy Cheval to speak about the World Anthropocene Manifesto. I think it is an event which will be organized on 29th of January 2021. So yeah, I would like to speak about the water-based issues in a transboundary river called Koshi. Koshi is one of the biggest river of Nepal. It flows from China, from the Tibetan glaciers, and it flows down to India through Nepal. So it affects around 30 million people are living in and around the Koshi region. We call it Koshi Basin. So in the past couple of decades, due to climate change, and we also went through a massive earthquake in 2015, the rivers has been shrinking a lot in some of the areas, and in the mid-hill areas there has been a lot of drying of springs, the river springs, and in the upper altitude areas, the snow glaciers has been the amount of snow has been reduced significantly. And in the lower altitude areas, in the Tarai region, in the plain region, the amount of water has been concentrated in between the 4 months between June and September. It will be flooded, and after that it will be dry every almost 8 months in a year.
C'est une vidéo là? Il n'y a pas de texte. Okay. Rebonjour, donc voilà,
Hello again, everyone.
encore une fois sur cette session très
So we've seen once again during this session very different types of videos with sound or without audio, or with poetry, or with rather climate issues, with personal experiences. So thank you very much for sharing these videos. I'm glad to welcome to this session some people who will share their testimony concerning the Manifesto of Anthropocene. So we have someone from Reunion Island, Mélissa, and 3 students from Sri Lanka, so I hope we'll be able to welcome them. So please turn on your cameras so that we can see you on screen.
Donc, voilà, m'entend bien. J'aimerais que.
So if you can all hear me, please could you share your message? Can the person from India share his or her message? And can you tell us where you speak from in India? Good morning, or good evening, rather.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez, Nandan?
Can you hear me, Nandan?
Yes, good morning. Sorry, I wasn't sure about the order.
Pas de souci.
Hi, I'm speaking from Delhi about a couple of recent events here. And I would like to share an image to begin with and talk over it. So if you just give me a moment.
Avec plaisir, merci.
I hope that there is a
Oui, on la
illustration
voit.
on screen.
On la voit bien.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Excellent. Just one moment.
Si vous peut-être zoomer un petit peu plus.
Yes. And I'll begin now. Nicholas Mirzoff, in his Ways to See the World, asks how we might visualize the effects of the Anthropocene. His answer dwells on visualizations of the longue durée captured in innovative visual installations. But there is also the need to make one aware of what Bernard Stiegler calls the organological freight. The organological is the way organic and artificial resources of pre-individual and psychic resources shape possibilities, desires, and expectations. These reservoirs are epochal, and we currently live in an epoch of entropy. In picturing this, we have recourse to one of visuality's oldest properties. The visual can be emblematic. This comic and others like this draw attention to protests over laws created as solutions to the economic consequences of a pandemic, speculated to have begun with human encroachment into natural spaces and exacerbated by human networks that reduce the planet to flight paths. The protesting farmers depicted here, those with a connection to the land, see the proposed solutions as an invitation for a complete capitalist takeover. The laws protested open farm produce to sale outside regulated markets. While champions of liberal and capitalist markets see this as empowering the farmers themselves see it as reconfiguring their worlds for a market they are unequal to. The supply of food, threatened for years, now faces new threats, some even unnaturally natural. The threat addressed here is the progression of an exploitative relation to the land that is unmeasured. The land is not seen as an answer to a need, but as either a stockpile that can be enhanced with GMOs, or increasingly as a finite site for waste disposal as the country practically drowns in the waste it's producing. But the other threat unequally affecting the producers of food is a perversion of natural rhythms that causes land itself to disappear. In the Sundarbans, the sea has refused to recede as it did before 2015. With farmland and hunting grounds now underwater, humans and tigers are forced into volatile convergence on what land remains. The refugees created by these climate crises face not only loss of land, livelihood, and culture, but the threat of communal violence as they migrate to areas already hostile. With these farmers' protests, even leaving aside an institutional response that culminated in violence on Tuesday, the very announcement of the protests was received with neighborhoods closing themselves off and a pervasive anxiety hanging over the city of Delhi. Stiegler characterizes the Anthropocene as, among other things, a moment of questioning, but also the silencing of this questioning. Humanity, robbed of its assurance of continuation, is placed in a place of self-questioning that is answered or drowned out by the negative pretension of capital. The emblematic image, for the viewer who can read it, brings together a pervasive economics that devalues, a mediatization that undercuts when it should amplify, and a struggle against governance, bitter cold, and even discourses that alienate and exclude. The difference drawn between concrete farmer and disembodied arms of governance condense diverse differences of access and knowledge. While a physical presence marks a protest against exclusion, a virtual double arises and spreads across news and social media, recasting the debate along religious lines. The anthropic activity that Stiegler sees as becoming a geological factor here excludes the protesters and even bypasses many of the normal channels of legislation. thinking in the Anthropocene needs an answer to the question of sustenance for both the process of physical growth and the process of individualization. Such sustenance should be shared and not extracted from land and landowner alike. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Nandan.
Thank you, Nandan. This notion of sharing territories and sharing land, and this notion of protest really was a very strong message. Please stay with us. We're going to talk about this. I just want to listen to other people before I open up to everyone. We have, is Mélissa from La Réunion, is she here? Can she talk about something in this manifest? Well, thank you for your presence here. Thanks for attending from Réunion. Well, thank you for this invitation. I'm not going to say much because it was already been a testimony from La Réunion, which talked about a certain number of violence from the colonial past, which is problematic, creates between humans and non-humans and the environment, and the feeling that we've reached the point of no return, where everyone is wondering what we can do. And on this basis, there's a question that I ask, and that is of responsibility of this crisis and our ability to act. And I think that Réunion can teach us something. It is, in 1946, it became a French département, and in the 1970s we started to see the same, to envisage the same possibilities, the same standard of living as other French people, to access mass consumption. And this is very complicated to come back on that development model, because it's something that has been sold by the media, that is promoted as the only way of life that is desirable, that we need to aspire to, especially when we're in the bottom of the social ladder. So I would like to say is that we expect of the South, we expect that the South and islands become real microcosms of real playgrounds for experimentation. And we expect that the South becomes, we maintain the basis that we have lost in the West. And during the festival, this has been said, and especially when we look at the deterioration of our everyday life, especially in Europe, in the West, and the ways of life that we refuse to question. So if we put nature on a pedestal and yet refuse to call into question our ways of life, the poorest suffer. So I don't want to point my finger, but instead of looking at other countries which have an exotic environment, we have to look. Sorry, I didn't get that. So, well, thanks, Mélissa. Very interesting message on a message of justice and equality between our different territories. So before we comment on that together, I'd like to continue with the testimonies. We go to Sri Lanka. If they feel that there are similarities with their experience. There are 3 students who are online. I think we are lucky to have different countries in context. Can Maneesha talk first? And thank you for your presence. Please tell us where you are exactly. And your age, if you're students, what you're studying, please don't hesitate so that we can all get to know each other a bit better.
Hi everyone. So, hi everyone.
Bonjour, bonjour, on vous entend bien.
So, firstly, I personally believe what the reason for this Anthropocene. So, the main reason for this Anthropocene is that the global unsustainable population. So, this is the main reason for this Anthropocene. So, when I'm going to contrast the situation before and during this COVID pandemic period, we can see a clear difference between these two situations. So first, if we consider about the situation during this COVID pandemic period, we can see that the environmental population and so many things have been changed to a great extent. Also, if we see that the quality of the air, the quality of the soil, and there are so many good possible things take place after this COVID pandemic period when we consider focusing our environment. So we can see that this is happened due to the reduction of those human impacts on the environment. When the human impacts have reduced to a great extent, the environmental population has been decreased. But now we have faced a huge destruction. It is that the disposal of those COVID virus surgical waste. So we can see that the people without awareing about the consequences and also without those prescribed guidelines, they just throw those coronavirus face masks and those surgical waste here and there. So you can just imagine the devastating impacts of this. The best thing is that when they get accumulated in the environment, they will just break into nanoplastic and microplastics, and they will accumulate through those food chains, leading very devastating anthropogenic impacts. So the reason why the people throwing those surgical waste here and there is the unawareness of those people. Unawareness, and as well as without following those prescribed guidelines to correct disposal of those waste. So, and then I will move into my next question. It's that how to inculcate good attitudes within people. So in this, from my experience, the root causing factor which offend moral concerns of the attitudes and practices of the people is that mainly those attitudes. So I personally believe that if we can inculcate good attitudes within people, eventually we can surpass this challenge and we can eventually protect the environment. And my ideas about change in this situation is, in present too, there are so many newly implemented solutions, but the question is that whether we have implemented the truly real solutions to cope with this challenge. My first thing is that if we realize the situation prevailing in present, we can eventually cope with those challenges and make reliable solutions to protect our environment. So we can start our first step from our home, in village and in country-wise. After that, in global-wise, we can implement so many solutions, instead leaving them to happen spontaneously. So after that, we can use those 4R concepts, like reduce, reuse, recycle, and restore concepts to protect the environment. So before answering the last question, that whether we are earthlings, I would like to say something. It's that, do you ever think why humans given a well-developed brain with those alluring immense power of five knowledge and processing, I personally believe that the knowledge is to protect the other creatures. So we have the power to identify those global sequences, and we have the power to protect the environment. So if we, and I feel satisfaction about the overall situation prevailing in the present. The first thing is that I feel very happy about and contented about the attempt of the people who try to protect the globe. And I'm very ridiculous and feel angry about the people who are trying to destroy this natural beauty when even taking those arms off. We have the strength, we have the power, we have the strength to protect the environment. So all we have to do is we have to step into a single step and protect the environment. So we have the power. We all get together and protect the environment. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour ce témoignage.
Thank you for your testimony. We do find there is a note of hope in the gestures and rituals and practices that we can implement to move towards a more sustainable way of life. So it would be great to have a few examples of what you actually experience in your country. So I'd also, I don't know if you know each other, but if the other people from Sri Lanka can. So I'd like to talk to Janudi, if you can talk perhaps a bit shortly, a bit of a shorter presentation so we can discuss it. Janudi, are you there?
Est-ce que vous auriez quelque chose à nous dire? Avec autant d'émotion et de...
And with as much fervor and emotion as your colleague.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Today we're actually 3 students learning in Sri Lanka. We're learning about science, actually, and we're still studying. And personally, today I'd like to introduce how we feel morally as students, as part of the youth of our country. Because personally, we believe that this is all to do with our very own mindsets, right? When it comes to a country or a nation or the world as a whole, we can actually implement things. That's right, but we can't do anything unless our mindsets are justified on one thing, right? According to what we believe, with our country, we're not blaming anybody. We're just saying that our wants kind of outweigh our needs. And because of that, we aren't necessarily satisfied with having things at a sustainable and functionable level, right? And because of that, we're always demanding on the receiving end, yet we're giving back nothing in return, and that's hardly fair, is it? And also because of that, and because of commercialization, because of this whole rat race of a life we're living, we're always trying to be the best at whatever it is we're doing, regardless of what happens to anything and everybody else, right? And with that mindset, and with the mindset that we believe that a global issue has to be faced and has to be addressed by officials or global interventions or summits or the big people, as long as that's our mindsets, nothing we do is ever going to make a huge difference, right? And the other thing that we believe is that this happens step by step, gradually, right? And also because of that, the solutions and the way that we need to put an end to this has to go step by step, gradually as well. And so we're not saying we have to start big. Let's say an individual takes complete responsibility for their own actions and then works towards reducing their own carbon footprint. Or as Maneesha said, if it comes to the problem of face masks and surgical masks due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a big problem in our country nowadays, if every individual took responsibility for how they handle their waste or how they work with their family, that in turn consequently goes on to their family, to the nation, to the country, and overall into the globe. And what we believe is that this is a global issue, right? And a global issue requires the whole of the globe to actually work towards it, and not just a few people or just a few organizations. And what we believe is that if we work together, one by one, ultimately for this global issue, we can come into a collaborative and collective intervention. And for an issue like this, we believe that that is exactly what we need right now. Thank you.
Merci à vous. J'ai pas entendu ce que tu m'as dit, mais bon. Mais je vais peut-être laisser la parole.
Thank you. I just want to hand over to the last student.
Qui est avec nous, voilà, qui a peut-être aussi un autre message. Voilà, là on a entendu le besoin que tout le monde
the need to work step by step.
Voilà, les messages sont clairement passés.
So this message has been listened to. Do you have anything else to say? The third student, I don't know how we pronounce your name, Dewmini.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Dewmini. Can you hear me?
Oui, très bien.
Yes, we can hear you.
Bienvenue.
Welcome.
Yeah. As a solution to this problem, as a representative of the Sri Lankan younger generation, I believe the environmental literacy in people should be improved. That is the understanding, the motivation, the skills, the engagement, the involvement, and taking the responsible decisions towards the environment conservation and for future generations and sustainable use of environment. This environmental literacy should be improved, and that comes through the heart. That is the attitude, as Janudi and Maneesha said. Yeah, it's the mindset after all. So one thing that we can do is to impose this in the school curriculum in a more practical manner. And also media of our country has a very great and important role in bringing this conversation to the society. So people are not aware of what is happening to the environment. The best example is a garbage disposal problem in Sri Lanka. People use polythene and plastic excessively, and there is no proper mechanism to dispose garbage. So it is very important that we come to our moral conscience. We understand individually what we must do. For example, following the 3R system, reducing, recycling, and reusing. I can use an alternative instead of a lunch sheet when taking lunch to my school, to my office. In such ways, we can individually take steps. So that is what is needed. And at the end, we must understand what we should focus is on ethics rather than just this development as a developing nation to be more better. No, we must focus on ethics. We must protect our mother nature. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Vous avez des messages communs.
Well, you do have very common messages which are very strong and they come from the heart, and it's very important to listen to young people, and that's what you have been saying, each of you, that people should change their mindset and that we should all talk together, and we should see the importance of different countries and different origins and ages should talk together. I have been told that someone has not yet had a chance to talk. Rulan from India. Nandan from India has already highlighted the challenges of sharing the land. What can you add to that testimony on how we can live better together on this planet? I've also been told that secretly you work on air science. Do you have a specific message to put across?
Bonjour. Yes, I work as an air pollution. I'm a PhD student and I work on air pollution. So I want to talk something about the air pollution problem and the also COVID-19. So, for example, I would take an example from India. During March and April, when COVID-19 hit almost whole of the world and also India, so we had this very strict lockdown there during this whole period, that no activity whatsoever was allowed, and we saw like a really different picture of the world. For example, from some cities 100 miles away from the Himalayas, people saw the Himalayas after like 30 decades or so. And everybody believed that air pollution has drastically decreased. But actually, when we did the research, when we studied the data, we found out that the air quality, especially in bigger cities like Delhi and Kolkata, it changed from a worse level to a poor level, not to a very good level. And so this brings a question: an event as big as a lockdown, where every activity was shut down, could not bring a huge positive impact. So is there something more, or we're not thinking of a bigger picture? And in some ways, like the coronavirus was like kind of like an irrefutable proof that we were looking for, that we are harming the environment in ways we cannot even imagine. So I believe that we need to look at new sources of pollution, and also we need to mix citizen science and social sciences along with the natural sciences, because for example, when we think of climate change and making changes, we have to also imagine how these societies will change with the impact from these things and how they can take steps. For example, USA just signed the Paris Agreement, which they denied. The Trump government denied 3 years ago that they would not be part of the Paris Agreement. But now they take a step forward. So I think that's a good step, but it's still not enough because the goal is very superficial. So I think we need to have solutions which will require huge behavioral shifts. And it is also clear that this transformation would also mean technological, institutional, policy, and social innovation. We also have to make sure that every section of the society is included, because we know from these kinds of problems, the poor, the marginal section is affected the most. So we need to come with some kind of solution that is way more sustainable than what we're thinking right now. So that's what my message is. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Rulan. Voilà, vous accordez tous sur la notion d'avoir conscience de notre.
Thank you so much for your participation, and it's really interesting to see how conscious we can be about our impact and the necessity to change our behavior and to stop exploiting the nature and human beings. And Nandan, I'd like to give you the floor again because you were our first speaker. So, what would you tell us? Do you have precise examples of actions that could be taken concerning the air quality? And we've also talked about water. We've talked about land sharing and also sharing the sea. So what's your take on everything you've just heard? Are you still with us, Nandan?
Yes, I'm here, just waiting for the question in its entirety. Thank you. And when especially Rulan was talking, I realized that even in thinking about what to talk about here today, the pollution had slipped my mind. It was a very present, very deeply felt change in the early days of lockdown, when we felt that there was a perceptible difference in the air quality. But simply because of the way these problems shift, we seem to forget one in favor of something more present. And I think that kind of retention, having a memory of the whole, is important even to some of what was said about how we must be more conscious. But I would also like to say that a lot of proposals for the change and to stop have to factor in that it's no longer possible for us to give up certain technological advances that have happened. They have become part of us, and it's not simply a question of seizing anything, because the one thing the lockdown has made very apparent is that even when faced with a deadly virus, we couldn't completely put a halt to travel, to trade, to economic functioning. And any solution we have has to factor in the difficulty of, or the impossibility of stepping back, or it's not as simple as rolling back an update. And in terms of sharing, I think a very present problem we have here is there really seems to be a contest over space. we have landfills that are filling up with garbage that if we burn, we create more pollution. And if we leave or move, we're encroaching into space that might otherwise have been used. So I fear I don't have any very present solutions like this, except for perhaps these cautions about forgetting and being aware of.
Il y a aucun problème.
Well, no problem. Nandan, if you had the recipe, maybe we'll all buy it. You know, and would love to hear it. But the thing is, we do understand that there's no specific action to be led. It's difficult to find the right solution. But the fact of considering our planet as not being the, you know, the slum or the bin of humanity is something that is absolutely crucial. And we've also mentioned other aspects, but maybe let's come back to the videos that you've probably watched and listened to, hopefully. So we've heard Louise who talked about topophilia and the need to love the planet and the places we live in by reconnecting and taking a closer look at Mother Nature. And in the previous session, we've talked about art as being one of the ways to reconnect to nature. Do you think that this is one of the ways we could reconnect to nature, to consider that our planet is not a garbage space, not a wasteland? How can we love our planet better? And Nandan, if you want to react to this, and maybe Mélissa?
If I could go first, I agree very strongly to that, though on one level, my response is still a very anthropomorphic response. It's that if we simply focus on humans and the human problem and protecting a resource for humanity, then one very present factor about art is its ability to exactly raise that awareness, that people become suddenly more aware when it's presented not as hard facts, but as a creative expression. And for me, a striking example of that is exactly the tiger. With the Sundarbans, we have this clash between these marginalized communities who have increasingly to farm, hunt, and fish in areas that are now hunting grounds for these tigers. So there is a very real conflict here. And it might be, in a very abstract sense, easy to talk about protecting the animal there. And that is incredibly important because this is one of those very small refuge for the Indian tiger. But it also has to be aware of the people there. And simply to stick with the tiger, the artistic representation of the tiger, because the tiger is this striking animal, has in many ways, at least here, helped efforts to conserve and protect. And that would be my quick response. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Nandan. We did see that you've given a concrete example. The example of the tiger, showing how we can sometimes go on the tiger's territory or other animals' territory, and this is a striking example. And Mélissa, do you have a reaction to this and to this notion of sharing nature and Mother Nature? And what's your take on everything that's been shared by other participants? And what do you think the meaning of sharing our experience can be? Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Yes, thank you. What's striking to me in this conversation is that we've educated the people so much to raise awareness towards environments. Well, we can see that we've been shaped to think that we need to be aware of our own responsibility, and of course it's really important. But whether we're in the Reunion Island or not, well, 80% of the waste that we produce come from companies and not from individuals. Same thing for water. 10% of the water use is for individuals. The rest is for the industry, and I can't remember which country it was, and I think it was in the United States. But, you know, golf courts and pitches take more water and absorb more water than individuals in the whole country. So we need to call for the company's responsibility in the private sector, because they base their economy and the way they work on this way of working. So, of course, we need to raise awareness towards civil society, but we do not all have the same impact and the capacity of action on what can be done. And this is something that we are gradually hearing. We're hearing this a lot more. And there's this collective awareness raising, and people are gradually getting more and more conscious of this. But I think that we have responsibility. We do play a role in the way we can build alliances and see how we can help each other, and how can we build a bond between citizens in order to share our experience and to see how serious the problem is, and maybe to raise awareness amongst companies from other countries. Could you react to this? And as you were saying, that this does not only depend on us, so what can we do at other levels? Well, I fully agree with what you've just said, and on the necessity of creating some kinds of resisting groups and of activism, but it's not the only way. Because large companies are the first to encourage us to recycle our waste, etc., etc. So we only focus on this, and we need to overcome this and raise the question of a broader kind of responsibility. And, you know, this conception of preservation of the environment is a bit cliché right now. And so maybe we could find synergies on other aspects. And the question of responsibility is absolutely crucial. And it goes through everything that's just been said earlier. But to me, it's also urgent to understand who does what and for whom. Well, you question the notion of co-responsibility, that's what you're saying. And of course, it is something that is really strong, and it's something that is being repeated more and more. Students from Sri Lanka were representing the youth, and they were talking about the need in the way we are educated to take into account these new habits and to love our planet better and to protect it better. But we should not oppose these two notions. I think there's a hierarchy in terms of responsibility, and that's what you're questioning. But the awareness-raising campaigns are also very important for everyone. How much time do we have left? Well, just 1 minute left. I'm sorry, we're dealing with everything at the same time, so we're probably going to have to wrap it up. So if we only have 1 minute left, could you please turn back your cameras on? Because, of course, even if we're not all responsible, in just one sentence, is it something you feel hopeful about? And especially because we've felt that our students wanted to believe in something. So if you had one sentence to share, what would it be to give hope to people? Maybe we can start with Dewmini. Oh, I'm sorry, we no longer have time. I'm really sorry, please accept our apologies. But please share the messages that you want on the chat room, and because we're going to open the fourth session very soon. And thank you all very much for all your heartfelt messages, and we hope that we'll have you back soon. Thank you so much.